This happened just this past July when I was 25 years old. My girlfriend Emma and I decided to rent a beach cottage for 2 weeks on the North Carolina coast. We'd been dating for about 3 years and thought it would be the perfect summer getaway. The rental was surprisingly cheap for being right on the water, which should have been our first red flag, but we were young and broke and didn't think twice about it. The cottage was small but charming, one of those classic beach houses with weathered blue siding and a wraparound porch. It sat at the end of a quiet street, separated from the neighboring houses by about 50 yards on each side. The nearest house to our left looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and overgrown grass. The one to our right seemed occupied, but we never saw anyone coming or going. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon in mid-July. The heat was brutal, that thick coastal humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back within minutes of stepping outside. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, met us there to hand over the keys. She seemed nervous, talking quickly and avoiding eye contact. She went over the basics, how to work the ancient air conditioning unit, where the fuse box was, which cabinet held extra towels, but then she said something that stuck with me. "Don't go out on the beach after midnight," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "And if you hear knocking after dark, don't answer the door unless you're absolutely sure who it is." Emma and I exchanged glances. We both kind of laughed it off, thinking she was just one of those eccentric old ladies who like to tell ghost stories to tourists. Mrs. Patterson didn't laugh with us. She just handed me the keys, got in her car, and drove away without another word. The first few days were perfect. We spent our time on the beach, swimming in the ocean, reading books on the porch, and cooking simple meals in the tiny kitchen. At night, we'd sit outside and watch the stars, listening to the waves crash against the shore. It was exactly the peaceful vacation we'd been hoping for. On our 4th night there, things started to get weird. We'd gone to bed around 11, exhausted from a full day in the sun. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up, but the room was pitch black and Emma was shaking my shoulder. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. At first I didn't hear anything except the usual sounds, the ocean, the wind, the old house settling. But then I caught it. A rhythmic scraping sound, like something being dragged across wood. It was coming from the porch. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog. I got out of bed and went to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The porch light was off, which was strange because I was sure we'd left it on. The moon was nearly full though, providing just enough light to see. There was someone on the porch, a figure standing near the railing, facing the ocean. They were completely still, not moving at all, despite the scraping sound continuing. I couldn't make out any details in the darkness, just a human-shaped silhouette. "Is someone out there?" Emma whispered from the bed. Before I could answer, the figure turned its head toward the window. Not its body, just its head, rotating slowly until it was facing directly at me. Even though I couldn't see their face, I felt their eyes on me. The scraping sound stopped. I dropped the curtain and backed away from the window. My heart was pounding. Emma asked what I'd seen, but I couldn't find the words right away. We sat there in the dark bedroom for what felt like an hour, listening. The scraping sound didn't resume. Eventually, I worked up the courage to look out the window again. The porch was empty. The next morning, I checked the porch first thing. There were deep scratch marks in the wooden planks, running from one end to the other. They looked fresh, the exposed wood lighter than the weathered surface around them. Emma suggested we call the police. But what would we tell them? Someone stood on our porch in the middle of the night and scratched the wood. It sounded ridiculous. We decided to stick it out. We'd paid for 2 weeks and we'd already been there 4 days. Plus, nothing had actually happened to us. We were just spooked. That night, we made sure all the doors and windows were locked before bed. We left every light in the house on, including the porch light. We even pushed a chair against the front door for extra security. Then we tried to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of knocking. Not loud, aggressive knocking, but soft, almost gentle. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more knocks. It was coming from the front door. Emma was already awake, staring at me with wide eyes. The knocking continued. That same pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to look around the room, making sure all the windows were still locked. They were. "Should we call the police?" Emma whispered. I was about to say yes when the knocking stopped. We waited in silence, barely breathing. Then we heard it. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, walking from the front door around to the side of the house. They stopped right outside our bedroom window. I turned off my phone's flashlight, not wanting whoever it was to see light coming from our room. We sat in the darkness, listening to the footsteps move around the perimeter of the house. They went from our window to the back door, then around to the other side, then back to the front porch. This went on for what felt like forever, someone circling our house over and over. Then it stopped. Complete silence, except for the ocean waves. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I found more scratch marks. This time, they were on the window frames, deep gouges in the wood around every single window of the house. I also found something else. Footprints in the sand around the house. Bare footprints, human-sized, but with the toes splayed out in an unnatural way. That was it for us. We packed our stuff and left that morning, only 5 days into our 2-week rental. I called Mrs. Patterson to tell her we were leaving early and why she didn't sound surprised. "I should have told you more," she said quietly. "That house has a history. The previous renters, a couple about your age, they disappeared last summer. Police found the house empty, all their belongings still there, but no sign of them. Before that, another couple reported the same things you did. The knocking, the footsteps, the scratching. I asked her why she was still renting the house out if she knew all this. She was quiet for a long moment. "I need the money," she finally said. "And most people don't experience anything. It's random. I'm sorry." She refunded half our money, which felt like an insult considering what we'd been through, but we took it and left. About a month after we got home, I was scrolling through local news from that area and saw an article that made my stomach drop. A couple had been reported missing. They'd been renting a beach cottage for their vacation and hadn't returned home when they were supposed to. The article included a photo of the cottage. It was the one next to ours, the one that had looked abandoned with the boarded-up windows. Police had searched it and found evidence that someone had been living there. They found clothes, food, and dozens of photographs. Photographs of the beach, of the street, and of various people who appeared to be vacationers. The article said some of the photos were taken through windows. I never told Emma about that article. We don't talk about that vacation anymore. But sometimes late at night, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I think about those footprints in the sand, about the way they circled our house over and over, about how close they came to our windows. And I think about Mrs. Patterson saying that most people don't experience anything. Most people. But what about the ones who do? What happens to them? I'll never know what would have happened if we'd stayed the full 2 weeks, and I'm grateful I don't have to find out. This happened in early June, right after school let out for the summer. I was 17 at the time, about to start my senior year of high school. My friends Tyler, Marcus, and I had been talking all spring about this swimming hole we'd heard about from some older kids. It was supposed to be out in the woods, about 30 minutes from town, fed by a natural spring that kept the water ice cold even in the middle of summer. The thing about growing up in a small town in Georgia is that there's not much to do in the summer. You either work, sit around at someone's house, or find some spot outdoors to hang out. The public pool was always packed with little kids and the lake was an hour away. So, when we heard about this swimming hole that supposedly nobody went to anymore, we were immediately interested. Tyler was the one who got the directions from his older brother Jake. Jake had gone there a few times back when he was in high school, about 5 years ago. He described it as this perfect little spot, a deep pool surrounded by rocks, where you could jump in from about 15 feet up. He said it was amazing, and he couldn't understand why people stopped going there. We decided to check it out on the first Saturday of summer break. The three of us piled into Marcus's beat-up Ford truck and headed out. The directions were pretty simple. Take the old highway out of town, turn onto a dirt road about 10 miles out, follow it for 3 miles, then park and hike in the rest of the way. The whole drive took maybe 40 minutes. The dirt road was exactly where Jake said it would be, barely visible from the highway and unmarked. We almost drove past it. Marcus turned onto it and we bumped along for a while, trees closing in on both sides. The road got narrower and rougher the further we went. At one point, Tyler asked if we were sure we were going the right way because it didn't look like anyone had driven down there in years. We parked at what looked like it might have once been a small parking area, just a slightly wider spot where the trees pulled back a bit. There was no other car there, which we took as a good sign. We grabbed our towels and the cooler of drinks we'd brought and started hiking. The trail was overgrown but still visible if you knew to look for it. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, swatting at mosquitoes and complaining about the heat. Then we heard it, the sound of running water. We pushed through some thick brush, and there it was. The swimming hole was exactly how Jake had described it. A clear pool of water, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by smooth rocks and fed by a small waterfall on the far end. The water was so clear you could see all the way to the bottom. There was a flat rock ledge about 15 feet up that looked perfect for jumping. It was absolutely perfect. Or it would have been, if it hadn't been for the weird feeling I got the moment we stepped into the clearing. I can't really explain it. It was just this sense that something was off, that we shouldn't be there. But I didn't say anything because Tyler and Marcus were already stripping off their shirts and heading for the water. Marcus jumped in first, cannonballing from the lower rocks. He came up shouting about how cold it was, but in a good way. Tyler went next, then they both looked at me expectantly. I shook off the weird feeling and joined them. The water was freezing, shocking after the heat of the hike, but it felt amazing. We spent the next hour swimming, jumping off the rocks, and just floating around. It was everything we'd hoped it would be. At one point, Marcus swam over to the waterfall to check it out. He disappeared behind it for a minute, then came back out looking confused. "There's like a cave back there," he said. "Not huge, but you can definitely fit inside. It goes back pretty far too." Tyler immediately wanted to check it out. I didn't, but I wasn't about to be the one to stay behind. The three of us swam over and ducked behind the waterfall. There was indeed a cave entrance, a dark opening in the rock that the water cascaded over. Marcus pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The cave was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, but tall enough to stand up in. The floor was smooth stone, worn down by who knows how many years of water flow. We walked in about 20 feet, our voices echoing off the walls. That's when we found them. There were items scattered on the cave floor. A sneaker, faded and falling apart. A waterlogged backpack, some bottles and cans. And further back, barely visible in the phone light, what looked like clothes. A lot of clothes piled together in a heap. "What the hell?" Tyler said quietly. We moved closer. The clothes were old, some of them practically rotting. There were shoes too, different sizes and styles. And then Marcus pointed his light at the cave wall, and we all saw it at the same time. Scratches, deep gouges in the rock, running vertically down the wall. They were grouped together in sets, like someone had been marking something, counting something. "We should go," I said. My voice sounded strange in the enclosed space. Neither of them argued. We backed out of the cave quickly, emerged from behind the waterfall, and swam back to the rocks where we'd left our stuff. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the flat jumping rock, carved into the stone, were initials. Lots of them. Dozens of sets of initials with dates next to them. I bent down to look closer. The most recent date I could find was from about 6 years ago. Before that, the dates went back decades, but nothing in the last 6 years. And some of the older initials had something else carved next to them, a single vertical line. "Hey, didn't Jake say he came here like 5 years ago?" Marcus asked. We all looked at each other. Jake had said he couldn't understand why people stopped coming here, but according to the initials, people had stopped coming here at least 6 years ago. That's when we heard it. A splash, but not from the main pool. It came from further up the waterfall, somewhere we couldn't see. Then another splash and another, like someone or something was moving down the rocks toward the pool. We didn't wait to see what it was. We grabbed our stuff and ran. We didn't bother with the trail, just crashed through the brush in what we hoped was the right direction. Branches whipped at our faces, and we kept tripping over roots, but we didn't slow down. Behind us, we could hear more splashing, closer now. I don't know how we found the truck. We must have gotten lucky. We threw everything in the bed, and Marcus gunned the engine, spraying dirt and rocks as we tore back down that narrow road. None of us said anything until we were back on the paved highway. "What the fuck was that?" Tyler finally asked. Nobody had an answer. We drove back to town in silence. When we got to my house, Marcus and Tyler dropped me off without coming in like they usually would. I think we all just wanted to go home and pretend it hadn't happened. but I couldn't stop thinking about those clothes in the cave, about the counting marks on the wall, about the initials with the single lines next to them. I kept trying to convince myself there was a normal explanation, but I couldn't come up with one that made sense. The next day, I asked Tyler if his brother Jake had really gone to that swimming hole. Tyler said he'd ask him. An hour later, Tyler called me back. "Dude, Jake has no idea what I'm talking about," Tyler said. "He says he's never heard of any swimming hole in the woods. He's never given me directions to anything like that." My blood ran cold. "But you said he told you about it. You got the directions from him." "I know," Tyler said, and his voice sounded shaky. "I remember him telling me. I remember the whole conversation. But he's swearing up and down he never said any of that." We never figured out where those directions came from. Tyler insisted his brother had told him, but Jake was adamant he hadn't. It was like the memory had been planted in Tyler's head somehow. About a week later, I was looking through local news archives online. I don't even know what made me do it. I searched for anything about missing people in our area. Going back years, I found more than I wanted to. Over the past 40 years, there had been at least 20 cases of people, mostly teenagers and young adults, who disappeared in the woods near that old highway they'd gone out there for various reasons: hiking, camping, exploring. Some of their cars had been found on that dirt road. None of the people were ever found. The most recent disappearance was from 6 years ago. A group of 3 college kids who told their friends they were going to check out a swimming hole they'd heard about. Their truck was found on the dirt road. They never came back. I showed the articles to Marcus and Tyler. We made a pact never to tell anyone where we'd been or how to get there. We figured if we didn't know where the directions came from, we couldn't accidentally pass them on to anyone else. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. About a month after our trip to the swimming hole, my younger sister came home talking about this cool place her friend had told her about. A swimming hole in the woods that nobody goes to anymore. I made her promise me she would never, ever go looking for it. I didn't tell her why, and I didn't tell her I'd been there. I just made her promise. She kept her promise as far as I know. But I wonder how many other people have had those directions just appear in their heads. How many have gone looking for that perfect swimming hole and never come back? Sometimes I think about those clothes in the cave, about the counting marks, and I wonder if we were supposed to add our own clothes to that pile. I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed longer, if we'd waited to see what was making those splashing sounds. I'm just grateful we ran when we did. I'm grateful we made it back to the truck. And I'm grateful I've never had the urge to go back. Never had those directions pop into my head again, like they did for Tyler. But I know that place is still out there, and I know it's still waiting. This happened during the first week of August. I'd just started my new job as a lifeguard at Crescent Beach, a small public beach about an hour from where I lived. It was my first real summer job, and I was actually pretty excited about it. The pay was decent, I'd get a tan, and how hard could it be to watch people swim? The beach wasn't very big, maybe 300 yards of shoreline, with a small parking lot and a single concession stand that sold overpriced snacks and drinks. There were 3 lifeguard stands total, spaced evenly along the beach. During busy times, all 3 would be staffed. During slower times, they'd only put someone in the middle stand and leave the other 2 empty. My shift supervisor was this guy named Derek, who'd been working there for 5 summers. He was probably 23 or 24, one of those perpetually tan surfer types who seemed to know everyone who came to the beach. He was the one who trained me during my first week. On my 3rd day, Derek was showing me the different stands and explaining the coverage areas. When we got to the stand on the far left, the one closest to the rocky outcropping that marked the end of the beach, he paused. "You'll probably never have to work this stand," he said. "We only use it on 4th of July and Labor Day weekend when it's absolutely packed. Rest of the time, we keep it closed." I asked him why, and he shrugged. "Bad sightlines. The rocks create a blind spot. Plus, it's just easier to cover the beach from the other 2 stands." And that made sense, but there was something about the way he said it that felt off. Like he was giving me the official reason, but there was another reason he wasn't mentioning. I didn't push it though. My first solo shift was the Saturday. It was a beautiful day, sunny and hot, but not too humid. And the beach was moderately crowded. I was stationed in the middle stand, the main one, with a good view of the entire swimming area. Derek was in the stand to my right, and the left stand remained empty like he said it would. Everything went smoothly for the first few hours. I blew my whistle at some kids who were swimming out too far. I helped a mom find her daughter who'd wandered down the beach standard stuff. Around 2 in the afternoon, I noticed something weird. There was someone in the left lifeguard stand. I could see a figure sitting up there, too far away to make out details, but clearly a person in the tall chair. I grabbed my radio to ask Derek who had been assigned to that stand, but before I could key the mic, the figure was gone. The stand was empty again. I stared at it for a minute, confused. I must have been seeing things, maybe the heat playing tricks on my eyes. I went back to scanning the water, but an hour later, I saw it again. Someone sitting in that left stand, there for just a moment, then gone. This time, I was sure I hadn't imagined it. I radioed Derek. "Hey, is someone messing around in stand 3? There was a pause. "Why do you ask?" "I keep seeing someone up there. They disappear before I can get a good look." Another pause, longer this time. "Don't worry about it, just watch your section." That response made me uneasy, but what was I going to do? I was the new guy. If Derek said don't worry about it, I wasn't going to push. But I couldn't stop glancing over at that stand, and every time I looked, maybe every 20 or 30 minutes, there would be someone sitting up there for just a brief moment, always too far to see clearly, always gone within seconds. When my shift ended at 6, I walked over to Derek as he was coming down from his stand. "What's the deal with stand 3? I asked. "And don't give me the sightlines excuse." Derek looked around, making sure no one else was nearby. "Look, don't freak out, but that stand is supposedly haunted. I know how that sounds, but everyone who works here has seen it. Someone's sitting up there, even though no one's been assigned to it." "Who is it?" "A lifeguard from like 30 years ago. Girl named Sarah something. She drowned trying to save a kid who'd been caught in a riptide near those rocks. They built a new stand there after she died, supposedly as a memorial. But people started seeing her sitting up there, watching the water. Management doesn't talk about it because they don't want to scare people away." I didn't know what to say. I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I'd definitely seen someone up there. "Just ignore it," Derek said. "She doesn't bother anyone. Actually, some people think she still watches over the beach. There hasn't been a single drowning at this beach since she died, even though there have been plenty of close calls." That made me feel slightly better, but it was still creepy. I couldn't shake the image of that figure appearing and disappearing. Over the next few weeks, I got used to it. I'd see the figure in stand 3 pretty regularly, always just briefly. I started thinking of it as normal, just part of the job. Some of the other lifeguards even talked about it openly once they knew I'd been filled in. Everyone had seen her. Some people claimed they'd seen her more clearly, described her as wearing an old-style red lifeguard swimsuit and having long, dark hair. I never got close enough to see details. Then, during the second week of August, things changed. It was a Tuesday, not very crowded. I was in the middle stand again, and Derek had the day off. The lifeguard in the right stand was a girl named Ashley who was new like me. Stand 3 was empty as usual. Around 3 in the afternoon, I saw someone in stand 3. Nothing unusual happened all the time. But this time, instead of disappearing after a few seconds, the figure stayed. And they were standing up, not sitting. They were facing the water and pointing. I followed where they were pointing and saw it immediately. A kid, maybe 10 years old, was way too far out. He was past the buoys that marked the safe swimming area, and he was struggling. His head kept dipping under the water. I didn't hesitate. I blew my whistle to alert Ashley, grabbed the rescue buoy, and ran into the water. The kid was probably 60 yards out, far enough that it took me a minute to reach him, even swimming as hard as I could. By the time I got there, he was barely keeping his head above water. I got the buoy to him, and he grabbed on, coughing and crying. I pulled him back to shore, and once we got to the shallow water, his parents were there freaking out. The kid was fine, just exhausted and scared. The parents thanked me probably 50 times. After everything calmed down and the family left, I looked back at stand 3. The figure was still there, still standing, and for the first time, I could see her clearly. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, red swimsuit, whistle around her neck. She was looking right at me. Then she nodded just once and sat back down. A second later, she was gone. Ashley came over to me. "Did you see her?" she asked quietly. "Yeah." She pointed to the kid. "That's how I knew to look." Ashley nodded. She does that sometimes. My friend who worked here last summer said she saved his ass once too. Kid was drowning and he didn't see it, but she pointed it out. I sat down on the sand, my heart still racing from the rescue. The whole thing was surreal. I'd just been helped by a ghost, or by something I didn't know what to believe anymore. For the rest of August, I saw her regularly in that stand. Sometimes she'd just be sitting there, watching. Other times she'd be pointing, alerting me to someone who needed help. She never saved people herself, at least not directly. She just made sure we saw them in time. On my last day of work, the Friday before I had to go back to school, I decided to do something. After my shift ended and everyone else had left, I walked over to stand 3, I climbed up the ladder and sat in the chair. It felt weird being up there, like I was intruding on someone's space. "Thank you," I said out loud, feeling stupid but not caring. "For the help this summer, for watching over everyone." The air felt different suddenly. Colder. Not in a scary way, just noticeable. And I swear I heard something, a whisper, maybe just the wind that sounded like, "Welcome." I climbed down and walked to my car. When I glanced back at the stand, she was sitting up there. I couldn't see her face clearly in the fading light, but I knew it was her I waved, and the figure raised one hand in return. I don't work at that beach anymore. I moved away for college and summers are now for internships and other jobs. But sometimes I think about that lifeguard stand and the figure who sits there watching over the swimmers. I think about the kid I pulled out that day, and how I might not have seen him in time if she hadn't pointed him out. Derek was right about one thing. There hasn't been a drowning at that beach in 30 years, and I don't think there ever will be, as long as she's still sitting up in that stand, keeping watch over the water where she died, trying to save someone else. This happened the 3rd weekend of June, when I was 19. My buddy Jake's parents owned a lake house about 2 hours from where we all lived, and they let him use it for the weekend, since they were going to be out of town. Jake immediately decided to throw a party, and invited basically everyone we knew from high school and our first year of college. There were probably 30 people there when I arrived Friday night around 8. The lake house was nice. Not huge, but big enough for that many people to spread out. It had a dock that went out maybe 50 feet into the water, and Jake had strung up lights along it that reflected off the lake. The whole scene looked like something from a movie. I came with my girlfriend Melissa and our friends Ryan and Zoe. We'd all gone to high school together and were home from different colleges for the summer. The party was already going strong when we got there, music blasting, people drinking, the usual stuff. Everything was pretty normal for the first few hours. We hung out on the dock, went swimming, even though the water was cold, played beer pong on the back deck. Around midnight, Jake suggested we take the boat out on the lake. His parents kept a pontoon boat tied to the dock, and Jake had permission to use it as long as he was careful. About 15 of us piled onto the boat, and Jake steered us out toward the middle of the lake. It was a clear night, warm, with a full moon that made the water shimmer. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, and we were playing music, just cruising around and hanging out. It was honestly perfect. We'd been out there maybe 20 minutes when Ryan noticed something. "Is that another boat?" he asked, pointing off to our left. We all looked. There was definitely something out there, a dark shape sitting low in the water. No lights on, no sound, just sitting there, maybe 100 yards away. "Probably just someone fishing," Jake said, but he sounded uncertain. Who would be fishing with no lights at midnight? We kept going, but I couldn't stop looking at the other boat. Something about it felt wrong. As we got closer, I realized it wasn't moving at all. No gentle rocking from waves, no drift. It was completely still, like it was anchored. "Let's check it out," someone suggested. I think it was Ryan. "I don't know," Jake said. "We should probably head back." But people started egging him on, saying he was scared, making jokes. Eventually, he gave in and steered our boat toward the other one. As we got closer, details started to emerge. It was an old fishing boat, maybe 15 feet long, with peeling paint and rust stains. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. There were no people in it, no fishing gear, nothing. Just an empty ancient boat sitting perfectly still on the water. Jake pulled up alongside it, close enough that we could have reached out and touched it. That's when Melissa grabbed my arm. "Look at the name," she whispered. Painted on the side, faded but still legible, was a name, Remembrance. "That's a weird name for a fishing boat," Zoe said. Someone laughed nervously. Maybe it's a ghost boat. We all made jokes about it, but nobody laughed very hard. There was something deeply unsettling about that boat. The way it sat so still. The way the shadows seemed darker around it. The complete absence of any sound even when our boat's wake should have rocked it. "Can we go?" Melissa asked. "This is creeping me out." Jake started to steer away, but then Ryan did something stupid. He reached out and grabbed the side of the old boat, pulling us closer. "Dude, what are you doing?" Jake yelled. "I want to look inside," Ryan said. Before anyone could stop him, he climbed over onto the old boat. The moment his feet touched the deck, the temperature dropped. I mean, it plummeted. 1 second it was a warm summer night. The next, we were all shivering. Our breath started coming out in visible puffs. "Ryan, get back here!" Jake shouted, but Ryan wasn't listening. He was standing in the boat, looking down at something. His face had gone pale. "Holy shit," he said quietly, then louder. "Holy shit!" "What is it?" I called. Ryan looked up at us, and his eyes were wide with fear. "There are names carved in the deck, dozens of them, with dates. The most recent one is from last week." Before any of us could respond, we heard it. A splash, but not from near our boats. It came from further out on the lake, somewhere in the darkness. Then another splash, and another, forming a circle around us. "Start the boat," Melissa said urgently to Jake. "Start it now." Jake turned the key. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. The splashing was getting closer, tightening the circle. We still couldn't see what was making the sounds, but we could hear something else now. Whispering. Dozens of voices whispering words we couldn't quite make out. "Ryan, get back on this boat right fucking now," Zoe screamed. Ryan scrambled back over, nearly falling in the water. The second he was back on our pontoon boat, Jake tried the engine again. This time, it roared to life. He gunned it, and we took off across the lake, leaving the remembrance behind. The cold disappeared as soon as we were 50 yards away. The temperature went back to normal. Our breath stopped fogging, and the whispering stopped. We made it back to the dock in maybe 3 minutes, Jake pushing the boat as fast as it would go. When we got back to the house, Ryan showed us his phone. He'd taken a picture of the names carved in the remembrance's deck while he was standing on it. The photo showed dozens of names, each one followed by a date. He was right about the most recent one. It was from just 6 days ago. The name was Kevin Porter. I grabbed my own phone and Googled the name plus the town we were in. My stomach dropped when I saw the results. Kevin Porter, age 22, had drowned in the lake last week. He'd been at a party at a friend's lake house and had gone swimming late at night. His body wasn't found for 3 days. I looked at some of the other names in Ryan's photo, the ones that were clear enough to read. I found articles about almost all of them. Every single one had drowned in that lake, going back decades. The oldest name I could make out was from 1987. We showed Jake, and his face went white. "My parents never told me about this," he said. "They never said anything about people drowning here." "Maybe they didn't know," Melissa suggested, but her voice made it clear she didn't believe that. We tried to enjoy the rest of the party, but the mood was ruined. People started leaving around 1 in the morning, and by 2, it was just the 8 of us who'd been on the boat. We sat in the living room, lights on, none of us wanting to sleep. Around 3, we heard something on the dock. Footsteps, slow and wet, walking from the end of the dock toward the house. We all froze. The footsteps got closer, reached the back door, then stopped. We heard the doorknob rattle. Jake had locked it when we came inside, and we all sent silent thanks for that. The doorknob rattled again, more insistently. Then we heard it whispering. The same voices from the lake, dozens of them all talking at once. We couldn't make out individual words, but the tone was clear. They wanted in. This went on for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The whispers cut off mid-word, and the doorknob went still. We waited, barely breathing, but nothing else happened. We left at first light, not even waiting to clean up. Jake said he'd come back later with his parents. We all just wanted to get away from that lake. A few days later, Jake called me. He'd told his parents what happened, and they'd finally come clean. The lake had a history of drownings, way more than average for a lake that size. It had been going on for as long as anyone could remember. His parents had known, but didn't think it was a big deal because they were careful and never went out on the water at night. But here's what really got me. Jake's dad said there were stories about a boat called the Remembrance. According to local legend, it had belonged to a man whose entire family drowned in the lake back in the 1950s. His wife and 3 kids had been out swimming when a storm came up suddenly. They all went under and never resurfaced. The man was so devastated that he spent the rest of his life on the lake in his boat, searching for their bodies. He never found them. Eventually, he died too. Some say by his own hand, some say from just giving up on life. His boat was supposed to have sunk decades ago, but we'd seen it, we'd touched it. Ryan had stood on it and photographed the names of people who drowned, including someone from just last week. I never went back to that lake house. Jake told me his parents ended up selling it later that summer. I don't know if the new owners know about the lake's history, about the remembrance, about the names carved into its deck. I still have nightmares about that night sometimes, about the sound of splashing forming a circle around us, about the whispers in the dark, about the way that doorknob rattled like something desperately wanted to get inside. And I think about Kevin Porter, whose name was freshly carved into that boat's deck, and I wonder if he'd seen the remembrance before he drowned. I wonder if he'd heard the whispers. Mostly though, I wonder how many more names have been added since we were there. And I wonder if anyone else has been curious enough to get close to that boat and look. I hope not. This happened in late July when I was 16 years old. My friends Connor, Alexis, and I were hanging out trying to figure out something to do on a Saturday night. We lived in a small city where there wasn't much for teenagers to do, especially if you didn't have a lot of money. We were sitting in Connor's car in a parking lot somewhere, just scrolling through our phones and complaining about being bored, when Alexis mentioned something she'd seen on TikTok. There was an abandoned water park about 40 minutes from where we lived. It had closed down maybe 10 years ago after some kind of accident, and it had just been sitting there empty ever since people apparently snuck in sometimes to take photos and videos. Urban exploration stuff. Alexis showed us some of the videos, and it actually looked pretty cool in a creepy way. Empty pools, rusting slides, everything overgrown with weeds and vines. Connor was immediately into it. "We should totally go check it out," he said. I was more hesitant. "Isn't that trespassing? What if we get caught?" "By who?" Connor laughed. "It's been abandoned for 10 years. Nobody's watching it." Alexis was already looking up directions. "It's 45 minutes away. We could be there by 9, have a few hours to look around, and be back by midnight. Come on, it'll be fun." I eventually agreed. We stopped by a convenience store to grab some flashlights and snacks, then headed out. The drive took us into increasingly rural areas until we were on back roads with no streetlights and barely any houses. Finally, Alexis's GPS told us we'd arrived. The water park was set back from the road, mostly hidden by trees that had grown wild in the years since it closed. There was a rusted chain-link fence around the property, but we could see where people had cut holes in it. We parked on the shoulder and walked over. Connor went through the fence first, then Alexis, then me. The moment I stepped onto the property, I got a weird feeling. I can't explain it exactly, but it was like the air was heavier somehow. The temperature felt different too, cooler than it should have been for a summer night. The water park was bigger than I'd expected from the videos. We could see the top of what must have been a really tall water slide rising above the trees. There were several buildings scattered around, probably old changing rooms and snack bars. Everything was covered in graffiti, layers upon layers of spray paint over the years. We walked toward what looked like the main pool area, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Most of the pools were empty, just concrete bowls filled with dead leaves and trash. But one of them, a smaller kiddie pool, still had water in it. Dark, stagnant water that looked almost black in our flashlight beams. "That's disgusting," Alexis said, wrinkling her nose. "Can you imagine what's growing in there?" Connor was already climbing up one of the smaller slides. "Come on, this is sick. I'm getting so many good photos." He was posting stuff to his Instagram story as we explored. We spent maybe an hour just walking around, checking out different areas. There was an old food court with broken windows where small animals had clearly been living. There was a wave pool that was completely empty except for some old shopping carts that someone had thrown in. There were bathrooms that we didn't even want to look inside. Then we found the tall slide, the one we'd seen from outside. It was called the Cyclone, according to the faded sign at the base. It was one of those massive slides that goes up like 6 stories, twists around a few times, then drops you into a pool at the bottom. Connor immediately wanted to climb it. Alexis and I tried to talk him out of it, arguing that the structure probably wasn't safe after 10 years of abandonment. But he was determined. "I'll be fine," he insisted. "I'm just going to go up and take some photos from the top. The view will be insane." Against our better judgment, we let him go. Alexis and I stood at the base with our flashlights pointed up, while Connor climbed the rusty stairs. We could hear his footsteps on the metal, loud in the quiet night, as he went up and up. He made it to the top, and we could see his phone's flashlight moving around up there. "Holy shit!" he called down. "You guys have to see this. You can see the whole park from up here." Then his voice changed. "Wait, what the fuck?" "What?" Alexis yelled. "What is it?" Connor was quiet for a second. When he spoke again, his voice sounded wrong, strained. "There's something up here. Someone. There." His scream cut through the night, sharp and terrified. Then we heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of someone sliding down the tube fast, way too fast. Not the normal speed you'd slide with water, but like they were falling. Alexis and I ran to the pool at the bottom, where the slide emptied out. It was hard to see in the dark, but our flashlights caught movement at the slide's exit. Connor came tumbling out and crashed into the empty concrete pool. He wasn't moving. We jumped down into the pool and ran to him. He was breathing but unconscious, with a nasty cut on his forehead and his left arm bent at a wrong angle. Alexis immediately called 911 while I tried to wake Connor up. His eyes opened after a few seconds. He looked terrified, disoriented. "We need to leave," he gasped. "Now, right now." "We're waiting for an ambulance," I told him. "You're hurt. You can't walk." "You don't understand," he said, gripping my arm so hard it hurt. "There's someone up there. They pushed me." The ambulance arrived about 15 minutes later, and the cops came too. We had to explain why we were there, and we all got in trouble for trespassing, but they were more concerned about Connor's injuries. He'd broken his arm and had a concussion, but he'd be okay. At the hospital, while we were waiting for his parents to arrive, Connor told us what really happened. He said he'd made it to the top of the slide and was taking photos when he noticed something. There was a door at the top platform, probably led to some kind of maintenance area. It was open, and through it, he could see someone standing in the darkness. Not moving, just standing there watching him. He'd called out, asking if someone was there. The figure had stepped forward into the moonlight, and Connor said it wasn't a person. Not exactly. It looked human-shaped, but wrong. The proportions were off. The limbs too long, the head too large, and its eyes reflected his flashlight like an animal's. That's when it had rushed at him. Connor tried to run, but it grabbed him and threw him into the slide tube. He said the last thing he remembered before hitting his head was sliding down in complete darkness, hearing something following him down the tube, getting closer and closer. Alexis and I shared a look. We didn't know what to say. Connor's story sounded insane, but we'd heard him scream. We'd heard him sliding down faster than should have been possible. A few days later, I decided to do some research on the water park. I found an old news article from when it had closed. There had been an accident on the Cyclone slide. A maintenance worker had been making repairs at the top platform when he'd fallen. He'd tumbled down the entire slide and landed in the empty pool at the bottom. The fall had killed him instantly. The water park had closed a few days later, officially due to safety concerns. But reading between the lines in the articles, I got the impression that workers had refused to come back. Several people had reported seeing someone on top of the Cyclone slide at night, even after the worker's death. Security cameras had caught movement on the platform, but whenever someone went to check, there was nobody there. The family of the worker who died had sued the park, claiming negligence. The case had been settled out of court, and the park had never reopened. I showed Connor the article while he was recovering. He went pale reading about the maintenance worker. "That's what I saw," he said quietly. "That's what pushed me." Alexis didn't want to believe it. It was probably just some homeless person or another urban explorer. Connor fell and hit his head. He imagined the rest. But I don't think he did. I think about that night a lot. About the scream that echoed through the abandoned water park. About the sound of Connor sliding down that tube faster than physics should allow. About the way his voice shook when he told us something had pushed him. The water park is still there, still abandoned. I've seen more videos from it on social media, people exploring it and posting photos. They all go during the day though. I've never seen anyone post about going at night. Connor, Alexis, and I haven't talked about it since that summer. We're all at different colleges now, have different friend groups. But sometimes I'll see an old photo of the three of us from back then, and I'll wonder if they think about it too, if they still remember the sound of Connor's scream echoing off those empty concrete pools. I hope nobody else tries to climb that slide. I hope the structure eventually collapses and they tear the whole place down. Because I don't think that maintenance worker ever really left. I think he's still up there, standing on that platform in the dark, waiting for someone else to climb high enough to reach him. And I think he's angry that he fell alone. This happened the second week of August when I was 14 years old. My family had rented a beach house in South Carolina for a week, one of those places right on the beach with a deck that looked out over the ocean. I'd been excited about the trip, but by day 3 I was kinda bored. My parents just wanted to sit on the beach and read, and my little sister was only interested in building sandcastles. I needed something else to do. That's when I found the metal detector in the garage of the rental house. It was old and dusty, like it had been sitting there for years, but when I put batteries in it, it still worked. I asked my dad if I could take it down to the beach, and he said, sure, probably just happy I'd found something to occupy myself with. I spent the rest of that afternoon walking up and down the beach, sweeping the metal detector back and forth. It was actually pretty fun. I found a bunch of quarters, some pull tabs from cans, and what looked like an old watch that had stopped working. Nothing valuable, but it was exciting every time the detector beeped. The beach wasn't very crowded. This wasn't one of the touristy areas. There were a few other families scattered around, but mostly it was just me, and the sound of the waves. I'd walked maybe half a mile from our house when the detector went off with a really strong signal. I started digging where it had beeped. The sand was wet and packed down, like I was getting close to where the tide usually came in. I dug for maybe 5 minutes, getting deeper and deeper, when my hand hit something hard, not a coin or a can, but something bigger, wooden. I dug more frantically, and eventually I unearthed what looks like an old box. It was maybe a foot long and 6 inches deep, made of dark wood that was waterlogged and falling apart. There was some kind of design carved into the lid, but it was too weathered to make out what it had been. My heart was racing. This was exactly the kind of thing you hope to find with a metal detector. Hidden treasure. I sat down in the sand and carefully opened the box. Inside was a collection of items. There were some old coins, corroded and green, a tarnished silver locket on a chain, a small leather journal that was basically destroyed by water damage, and at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth that disintegrated when I touched it, was a knife. It wasn't like a kitchen knife or a hunting knife. It was ornate, with engravings on the blade and a handle that might have been ivory. The metal had stayed remarkably intact, despite obviously being buried for a long time. I picked it up carefully and held it up to the light. The engravings looked like they might be words in another language, but I couldn't read them. I was so focused on the knife that I didn't notice someone walking up behind me until they spoke. "Where did you find that?" I jumped and nearly dropped the knife. An old man was standing a few feet away, staring at the box and its contents. He looked ancient, with deeply tanned and wrinkled skin and white hair. He was wearing beach clothes, but something about him seemed off. His clothes looked old-fashioned somehow, and he was completely barefoot. I dug it up," I said, gesturing to the hole in the sand. "With my metal detector. Is it yours?" "No," he said slowly. "But I know what it is. Where did you say you found it exactly?" I showed him the spot, and his face went pale. "You need to put it back," he said urgently. "Right now. Put everything back in the box, bury it, and walk away." "What? Why?" "That box was buried there for a reason," he said. "It's a binding box, do you understand? The items inside are meant to stay together, buried in that exact spot. If you separate them or remove them, you'll break the binding." I must have looked completely confused because he sighed and sat down in the sand next to me. A long time ago, maybe 100 years, maybe more, a man lived in a house near this beach. He was evil, did terrible things to people. When he finally died, the locals were so afraid of him that they gathered his most precious possessions and buried them in a binding box. The belief was that as long as his possessions stayed buried together, his spirit couldn't walk, couldn't cause harm. "That's just a superstition," I said. Maybe, the old man said. But are you willing to risk it? Have you ever heard of something being so evil that people were afraid even after it died? I looked at the knife in my hand. Now that he mentioned it, it did feel wrong somehow. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and heavy, heavier than it should be for its size. Put it back, the old man said again. Please. I started to do what he said, putting the items back in the box when I heard my dad calling me. I looked back toward our rental house and saw him waving from the deck. When I turned back to the old man, he was gone, just vanished. I looked up and down the beach, but there was no one nearby, no footprints in the sand except mine. I should have buried the box right then. Looking back, that's exactly what I should have done. But I was 14 and stupid, and I wanted to show my dad the cool stuff I'd found. So I closed the box, tucked the knife in my pocket, and started walking back to the house. That night was when things started going wrong. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. I called out, thinking it was my dad or mom, but no one answered. The footsteps continued. I got out of bed and opened my door. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the footsteps. They sounded like they were coming from the living room. Now I followed the sound, my heart pounding. When I got to the living room, the footsteps stopped. The room was dark except for moonlight coming through the windows. Everything looked normal. I was about to go back to bed when I saw it. There was someone standing on the deck outside, a figure silhouetted against the ocean. They were facing away from me, looking out at the water. As I watched, they turned their head slowly toward the house, toward me. I couldn't see their face, but I felt them staring at me. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, my breath coming out in visible puffs, even though it was summer. The figure raised one arm and pointed at me. Then they started walking toward the sliding glass door. I ran. I don't even remember making the decision to run. I just did. I sprinted back to my room, slammed the door, and pushed my dresser against it. I could hear footsteps in the hall again, getting closer. They stopped right outside my door. The doorknob started to turn. Slowly, like whoever was on the other side was savoring the moment. I grabbed my phone and almost called 911, but what would I say? There's a ghost trying to get into my room? Then I remembered what the old man had said, the binding box. I had broken it by taking the knife. I pulled the knife out of my pocket where I'd left it in my jeans. The moment I touched it, the doorknob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated down the hall. I spent the rest of that night sitting awake, the knife in my hand, too terrified to sleep. As soon as the sun came up, I snuck out of the house with the box and the knife. I went back to the spot where I'd found it and I buried everything. I buried it deep, deeper than it had been before, and I smoothed the sand over it until you couldn't tell anything had been disturbed. I never told my parents what happened. We spent the rest of the week at the beach and nothing else weird occurred, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something, that if I'd kept that knife even one more day, something terrible would have happened. A few years later, when I was in high school, I decided to research the history of that beach. I wanted to know if the old man's story was true. I found some old newspaper archives from the early 1900s. There had been a man who lived near that beach, and he'd been suspected of multiple murders, though it was never proven he'd died under mysterious circumstances. And the local community had apparently been so afraid of him that they'd performed some kind of ritual over his body. The articles didn't go into detail about what the ritual involved, but there was one line that stuck with me. It said the community leaders had taken measures to ensure he would never rise again. I think about that old man on the beach sometimes, the one who tried to warn me. I never saw him again after that day, and when I described him to the people at the house next to our rental, they said no one matching that description lived in the area. They thought I must have been confused or misremembered, but I know what I saw, and I know what happened when I took that knife from its burial place. I got lucky that I was able to put it back before whatever was bound to that box decided to do more than just scare me. Sometimes I wonder if the old man was really there at all, or if he was something else. Maybe a warning, maybe a last attempt by whoever had performed that binding ritual to protect people from making the same mistake I did. I've never used a metal detector since then, and I'll never dig up anything I find on a beach again, no matter how interesting it looks. Because some things are buried for a reason, and some warnings should be heeded, even if you don't fully understand them. This happened in mid-July when I was 20 years old. My boyfriend Tom and I had decided to go hiking in a state park about an hour from where we lived. It was a Wednesday, so we figured the trails wouldn't be too crowded. We both had the day off work and wanted to do something outdoors before the summer was over. The park had several trails of varying difficulty. We chose one that was marked as moderate, about 5 miles long, with some elevation changes but nothing too intense. The trail was supposed to loop back to the parking lot, so you'd end where you started, perfect for a day hike. We started around 10 in the morning. The weather was beautiful, hot but not unbearable, with a nice breeze that made it comfortable under the shade of the trees. The trail was well maintained at first, clearly marked with blue blazes painted on trees every 50 yards or so. For the first hour, everything was great. We saw a few other hikers heading in the opposite direction, exchanged pleasantries, kept moving. The trail started climbing more steeply, and we could tell we were getting into the less traveled part of the loop. Around the 2-hour mark, we stopped for water and a snack. That's when I noticed something weird. The blue blazes had stopped. We hadn't seen one in at least 10 minutes, maybe longer. I mentioned it to Tom, and we both looked around. There was a clear path ahead of us, worn dirt like plenty of people had walked it, but no blue blaze markers. "We probably just missed one," Tom said. "Let's keep going for a bit. We'll find another marker." We walked for another 15 minutes, no markers. The path started getting less defined, the dirt less worn. Tree branches hung lower, and we had to duck under them. We stopped again. "We should turn back," I said. "We must have taken a wrong turn somewhere." Tom agreed, so we turned around and started walking back the way we'd come. But here's where it got weird. After about 5 minutes, the path split into 3 directions. I know that sounds impossible, because we just walked this way and there'd only been one path. But now there were 3 distinct trails branching off, and we couldn't tell which one we'd come from. "What the hell?" Tom said, spinning around. "These weren't here before." We picked the middle path, the one that seemed most likely to be the way we'd come. We walked for maybe 10 minutes before reaching another split, this time 4 paths going in different directions. None of them looked familiar. I pulled out my phone to check the map app, but we had no signal. We were too deep in the forest. Tom had downloaded an offline map before we started, but when he opened it, the GPS couldn't get a lock on our location, the dot that showed where we were kept jumping around randomly. "Okay, don't panic," Tom said, though I could hear the edge of worry in his voice. "We'll just keep heading downhill. Eventually we'll hit a road or a stream or something, and we can follow it out." That was sound logic, so we started looking for a path that went downhill. The problem was that all the paths seemed to go uphill. No matter which direction we chose, we found ourselves climbing. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and I was starting to genuinely worry about being stuck out here overnight. We'd been walking for maybe another hour, trying different paths and always ending up at new intersections we didn't recognize when we found the marker. It wasn't a blue blaze. It was a wooden post, maybe 4 feet tall, driven into the ground at a fork in the trail. Carved into it was an arrow pointing to the right, and beneath the arrow were words, "Follow me home." "Finally," Tom said, relieved. "A trail marker. This must lead back to the parking lot." Something about it felt wrong to me. The carving looked old, the wood weathered and gray, and the wording was weird. Trail markers usually just have distances or trail names, not messages like, "Follow me home." "I don't think we should follow this," I said. "Why not? It's a marker. It's literally telling us how to get home. It doesn't look official, and why would it say, 'Follow me' instead of something normal?" Tom was getting frustrated. "Do you have a better idea? We've been lost for 2 hours. If this leads us back, I'm taking it." He started walking down the path the arrow indicated. I didn't want to split up, so I followed him, but my unease was growing with every step. The path the marker led us on was different from the others we'd been on. Narrower, darker, with trees that seemed to lean in over us. We didn't talk, just walked, and I noticed that Tom kept checking his phone, even though we both knew there was no signal. After about 10 minutes, we found another marker. Same wooden post, same carved arrow, same message. "Follow me home." This one pointed us down a path that turned sharply to the left. "See," Tom said, "it's leading us somewhere. We just have to trust it." But I'd noticed something. The sun was setting behind us, which meant we were heading east. The parking lot was west of the trails according to the map. We were going in the wrong direction. I pointed this out to Tom, and he stopped walking. He looked up at the sky, at the position of the sun, and I saw his face change as he realized I was right. "Then what are these markers?" he asked quietly. We heard a sound behind us, footsteps, someone walking on the trail we'd just come from. We both turned around, expecting to see another hiker, but the path behind us was empty. The footsteps continued though, getting closer, even though we couldn't see anyone. "Run," I said. We ran. We left the path entirely, just crashed through the undergrowth in what we hoped was a westward direction. Branches whipped at our faces and thorns grabbed at our clothes. Behind us, the footsteps were running too, matching our pace, always just out of sight. We burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was another marker. This one was taller, maybe 6 feet, and the carving on it was different. It didn't have an arrow, it just said, "You're home now." Beyond the marker, at the far edge of the clearing, was a cabin, old, decrepit, with broken windows and a sagging roof. The front door was open, and from inside came a smell that made me gag. Something rotten, something dead. The footsteps behind us stopped at the edge of the clearing. We couldn't see who or what had been following us, but we could feel them watching from the trees. Tom grabbed my hand. "We're not going in there," he said. "We're going around it." We started to circle the clearing, giving the cabin a wide berth. As we did, I looked in through one of the broken windows. What I saw will stay with me forever. The cabin was full of bones, human bones arranged in neat piles against the walls, skulls, femurs, rib cages, all sorted by type. And sitting in the middle of the room, in an old rocking chair facing the door, was a figure. I couldn't tell if it was a person or something wearing a person's clothes, but it was watching us. Its head turned to follow our movement across the clearing. We ran. We didn't stop running until we broke through the tree line on the other side and found ourselves on a paved road. A road that, according to the sign, led back to the state park entrance. We made it to the parking lot as the sun was setting. Our car was the only one still there. The ranger station was closed, but there was a sign saying the park closed at 8 p.m. It was 7:45. We'd been lost for almost 10 hours. In the car, Tom started crying. Not just tears, but full-on sobbing. He kept saying, "Did you see them? Did you see the bones?" Over and over, I held him until he calmed down. And then we drove home in silence. The next day, Tom wanted to report what we'd found to the authorities. We called the state park office and told them about the cabin and the bones. The woman on the phone was polite but skeptical. She said they'd send a ranger to check, but she also said there were no structures like cabins on that trail. All buildings in the park were accounted for and monitored. A ranger called us back 2 days later. He said they'd searched the area we'd described and hadn't found any cabin or any trail markers like we'd described. He suggested we might have been on private property adjacent to the park and that the heat and dehydration might have caused us to hallucinate some of what we saw. Tom wanted to go back and show them exactly where we'd been, but I refused. I never wanted to set foot in those woods again. Tom eventually went by himself, with 2 rangers trying to find the cabin they hiked for 6 hours and found nothing. No cabin, no markers, no clearing. But I know what we saw. I know those bones were real. And I think about those trail markers sometimes, the ones that said, "Follow me home." I wonder how many other hikers found them, how many followed them, and how many made it back out of the woods. Tom and I broke up about a month after that hike. Not because of anything that happened between us, but because neither of us could stop thinking about that day. Every time we were together, we'd see the memory in each other's eyes. It was easier to be apart. I don't hike anymore. If my friends suggest it, I make excuses. And I definitely don't go into state parks, no matter how well maintained they're supposed to be. Because I learned that day that not all paths lead home. Some of them lead somewhere else entirely. And if you follow the wrong marker, you might end up somewhere you can't leave. This happened when I was 18, the summer after I graduated high school. I'd gotten a job as a counselor at a sleepaway camp, about 3 hours from my hometown. It wasn't one of those fancy camps, just a small place run by a local church, with maybe 60 kids at a time and a dozen counselors. I'd been going to this camp as a kid, so when they offered me a job, I jumped at it. Free room and board for the summer, working with kids and getting paid. seemed perfect. The camp was on a small lake surrounded by forest. There were several cabins for the kids, 2 for the counselors, a mess hall, and an activities building. The camp ran in 2-week sessions with a few days in between for cleaning and preparation. I was assigned to one of the girls' cabins with 8 campers ages 10 to 12. My first session went great. The kids were fun, no major problems, and I was starting to think this was going to be an easy summer. Between the first and second sessions, during our few days off, most of the counselors went home, but I lived too far away to make the trip worthwhile, so I stayed at camp with a few others. That's when I started noticing weird things. The camp had a curfew policy, even for counselors. Everyone had to be in their cabins by 11 p.m. But on the second night between sessions, I woke up around 2 in the morning and heard someone walking around outside. I looked out the window and saw a flashlight moving near the lake. I figured it was one of the other counselors who couldn't sleep, maybe going for a walk. I almost went back to bed, but something made me keep watching. The flashlight stopped at the old boathouse at the edge of the lake. The door opened and the person went inside. The door closed and the light disappeared. I waited, figuring they'd come back out. But after 15 minutes, the boathouse stayed dark. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned it to the other counselors who'd stayed. Did anyone go to the boathouse last night? They all said no. In fact, they pointed out that the boathouse was locked and had been for years. The camp didn't use it anymore because it was in bad shape, supposedly unsafe. "You must have been dreaming," said Marcus, one of the guy's counselors. But his tone was weird, like he didn't quite believe that himself. Later that day, I walked down to the boathouse to check it out. The door was locked with a heavy padlock, rusty and old. The windows were so dirty I couldn't see inside. I walked around the building, and that's when I noticed something. There were fresh footprints in the mud near the back of the boathouse. Recent from last night, judging by how well defined they were. Someone had been here. I mentioned it to Marcus, and his expression changed. "Look, there's something you should know," he said quietly, looking around to make sure we were alone. "This camp has a history. About 10 years ago, before they had proper background checks and everything, there was a counselor here named David. He was weird, made some of the kids uncomfortable. One of the campers, a 12-year-old girl, went missing during his session." My stomach dropped. "What happened to her?" "They found her 3 days later, in the boathouse. She'd been locked in there and..." He trailed off. "She didn't make it. The heat, dehydration. David claimed she'd run away and he'd been looking for her. But they found evidence he'd known where she was the whole time. He got arrested, went to prison. The girl's parents sued the camp. That's why the boathouse has been locked ever since." "That's horrible," I said. "Yeah, and here's the thing. Some of the counselors who've worked here say they've seen someone near the boathouse at night, walking around trying the door. They think it's David, even though he's supposedly still in prison, or they think it's the girl. Either way, most people don't like to talk about it." I felt sick. The idea that I'd been watching someone walk into the place where a child had died, that I'd seen them go in and not come out. The second session started, and I tried to focus on my campers, but I couldn't stop thinking about the boathouse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the camp at night. On the 4th night of the session, one of my campers, a girl named Sophie, woke me up around midnight. She was crying, said she'd had a nightmare. I comforted her and got her back to sleep. But as I was climbing back into my own bunk, I glanced out the window. There was someone standing by the lake, just standing there, facing the water. They weren't moving at all. I grabbed my flashlight and was about to go check when the figure turned and started walking toward my cabin. As they got closer, I could see it was a girl, maybe a teenager, wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned somehow, a camp uniform from years ago. She walked right up to the cabin window and looked in, looked directly at me. Her face was wrong, not deformed or monstrous, just wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the skin too pale, the eyes too dark and too large. She smiled at me, and I saw that her teeth were all wrong too, filed down to points. I dropped the flashlight. When I looked back up, she was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat up watching the window, making sure nothing came near my cabin. In the morning, I went straight to the camp director and told her what I'd seen. I expected her to dismiss it, to say I'd been dreaming, or that it was just another counselor playing a prank. Instead, she went pale. "What did she look like?" I described the girl, and the director nodded slowly. "That matches," she said quietly. "That matches the description from the police reports, the girl who died. That's what she was wearing when they found her." She made me sit down and told me the rest of the story, the parts Marcus hadn't known or hadn't told me. The girl, her name was Emma, hadn't just been locked in the boathouse, she'd been tortured. David had been doing things to her, terrible things. And when the police had found her body, they'd found evidence of other victims too, photographs, belongings from other children who'd gone missing over the years. He'd been operating for a long time before they caught him. Emma's body had been in bad shape when they found it. The reports had described her teeth as damaged, broken in a way that suggested violence. "We've had sightings before," the director admitted. "Counselors who see her at night. She appears to some, but not others, usually people who are alone. She's never hurt anyone, but she scares them badly enough that they quit." "Why didn't you tell us this before we started?" I asked, angry now. "Would you have taken the job if I had?" She had a point. "What does she want?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe she's looking for something. Maybe she's trying to warn us. Or maybe she's just trapped here, repeating the last moments before she died. All I know is she shows up every few years, usually when we have new counselors. Then she disappears again." I wanted to quit right then. But we were only 4 days into a 2-week session, and I couldn't abandon my campers. So I stayed, but I made the director promise I could switch to a different cabin, one that didn't face the lake. For the rest of that session, I didn't see Emma again. But I heard things. Footsteps outside at night. Someone trying the cabin doors, turning the handles. Slowly, other counselors reported seeing her too, always near the boathouse or the lake. On the last night of the session, I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. I opened my eyes, and Emma was sitting on the edge of my bunk. This close, I could see how wrong she really looked. Her skin had a gray tinge, and there were marks around her wrists and ankles like she'd been tied up. Her smile was constant, frozen, not reaching her eyes. She leaned close and whispered something. Her breath smelled like lake water and rot. "He's coming back." Then she was gone. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights, waking up the other counselor who shared the cabin with me. I told her what happened, and she believed me. She said Emma had appeared to her too, 2 years ago, and had said the same thing. "Who's coming back?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. I always assumed she meant David, but he's still in prison. I checked." The session ended the next day, and I quit. I told the director I was sorry, but I couldn't come back. She understood and paid me for the full summer, even though I'd only worked 2 sessions. I found out later, through Facebook, that the camp closed down that fall. There had been an incident. A man had been caught on the property at night, trying to break into one of the cabins. When the police arrested him, they found he'd been living in the woods near the camp, watching it. He had photographs of the campers, lists of their names, detailed plans. His name was Michael, and he'd been David's cellmate in prison. David had told him about the camp, about how isolated it was, about how easy it had been. The police believe Michael had been planning to do the same things David had done, but he was caught before he could hurt anyone. Caught the same night I quit, actually. The same night Emma had warned me he was coming back. I don't know if Emma was really there, or if she was a manifestation of something else, guilt or trauma, or just the echo of something evil that had happened in that place. But I know that warning saved lives. The camp property was sold to a developer. They tore down all the buildings, including the boathouse. The last I heard, they're building luxury lakefront homes there. I hope Emma can rest now, wherever she is. I hope she's not still walking that shoreline at night, looking for someone to warn. I hope she found peace. But sometimes I wonder if places can hold on to trauma, if horrible events can imprint themselves on a location and replay forever. And I wonder if the people who move into those new houses will see her, if she'll appear at their windows late at night, smiling that terrible smile, whispering warnings about dangers that have already passed. I hope not. I really hope not. But I know I'll never forget the feeling of waking up to see her sitting on my bunk, the smell of her breath, the sound of her voice saying those 3 words. "He's coming back."